this episode of In the Loop, an effort in New York to cut down on commercial breeding of animals has drawn some criticism from pet store owners who disagree with the approach. We explore the potential impacts of this new law. Plus, one school is not letting grades define its students. We look at what its curriculum looks like when you take away the pressure of passing or failing. This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. We'll get to all that and more, but first, we want to bring some attention to a news story that might have floated under your radar last year. It involves a very specific kind of crime wave that's been slowly gaining steam. Over the last couple of years, federal law enforcement has been on high alert for potential attacks against a surprising target, power substations. 2022 marked a decade-long high of attacks at U.S. power stations, with nearly 120 attacks across the country.
A Department of Energy document obtained exclusively by News Nation outlines 6 never-before-reported intrusions at power substations in the state of Florida.
Thousands of people are still without power today after what authorities are calling an intentional attack on a power system in North Carolina.
Turning now to a shooting near Duke Energy facility in South Carolina. It comes just days after attack on 2 Duke Energy substations in North Carolina.
I'm here on Highway 93, just west of I-15, where a man broke into the solar fields and set his car on fire.
One of the 4 Washington substations targeted was set on fire last night. This all happened near Tacoma, just south of Seattle. An estimated 17,000 customers left in the dark there.
At least 5 power substations were reportedly attacked in Oregon and Washington last month.
There's a lot of variety in these attacks, from locations to methods, and no one group has claimed responsibility for these. That makes it hard for law enforcement to draw a definitive link between various attacks on power stations. But there are some common threads worth looking at. First, motivations. According to law enforcement, many perpetrators are hoping to create chaos and panic, and they often share ultra-nationalist or white power ideologies. Now, to be clear, not every attack on a substation has white nationalist links. For example, according to the FBI, one attack in Washington state on Christmas seems to have been meant to knock out power so the perpetrators could commit a robbery. And not every investigation is complete. But there's been enough of a pattern over the past few years for federal officials to take notice. In June of 2020, 3 men claiming to be members of the far-right Boogaloo movement allegedly planned to attack a power substation to incite violence during Black Lives Matter protests. In August of 2021, 4 neo-Nazis in North Carolina were charged with planning to take down a substation to create chaos as a cover for assassinations and other operations. In February of 2022, 3 white supremacists pled guilty in Ohio for plotting to knock out the U.S. power grid and cause a panic that could set off a race war.
There are many other reasons why people might attack substations or why there might be power failures that aren't related to extremist groups. But that said, there have been arrests for people who came close to pulling these things off from the white supremacist movement.
Heidi Byrick has been a long-time extremism analyst and expert, and she points out infrastructure has been a popular target for decades.
This sort of dream of taking down the electric grid or blowing up a nuclear facility to sow chaos so that you can launch a race war or engage in other activities has been the thinking for a long time. The program on extremism at George Washington University looked at Islamic extremist attacks on infrastructure versus white supremacists and found that white supremacists keyed in more on the grid and electricity than Islamic extremists who are more interested in things like destroying public transportation systems.
You don't have to dig too deep to find connections in white supremacist source material either. The white supremacist novel The Turner Diaries is often cited as a manual of operations for many white power groups. In a report, the Department of Homeland Security found it's also been used as a rough blueprint for attacking government infrastructure, like in the energy sector. It even depicts an assault on the Capitol and was removed off sites like Amazon after the January 6th insurrection. Aside from some ideological patterns, there's another thread seen through most of the attacks. A common refrain from security and energy experts and government officials is that attackers seem to know what they're doing. Let's look at the December 6th attack in North Carolina as an example. The gunman knew that substation would knock out power lines for a particular county. They were effective too. It left about 32,000 customers without power or heat, with the county declaring a state of emergency and curfew. According to one former government official, the gunman also seemed to know where to access the site and what to shoot at where no security was in place. As of now, the investigation is still ongoing, so the motive hasn't been confirmed and no arrests have been made.
The internet allows you to share materials like how to build a bomb, how to blow up a power station, how to use a rifle to disarm a substation. Because we haven't done as much infiltrating and undercover work and monitoring of social media, which the federal government should be doing, we're behind the 8 ball on dealing with this threat.
There's still a lot of speculation around these attacks, and despite some patterns, there's a lot we still don't know about who's behind them. But one thing most can agree on is that these attacks highlight the US power grid as an attractive target.
We spend a lot of money fighting terrorism, right, of various kinds. You'd think that we would put the money up to make sure that this nation's water supplies, gasoline, delivery systems, electrical grid, etc., are functioning. It makes no sense not to protect those systems.
Key pieces of US infrastructure have been seen as potential terror targets for decades, from dams to power lines to nuclear power sites. But will these recent attacks be a wake-up call to secure the US power grid? National correspondent Jamal Andrus tells us more about the true vulnerability of our power grid and what it would take to keep US infrastructure safe.
Been like living hell. Then the cold, you couldn't eat, couldn't cook nothing.
When 45,000 people lost power in North Carolina last month, it exposed a national problem that doesn't have a clear solution: securing the nation's electrical grid system.
Protecting critical infrastructure like our power system must be a top priority. This kind of attack raises a new level of threat.
The cause of the outage outraged the state. Someone shot 2 electrical substations through a chain-link fence. But that attack, as shocking as it was, wasn't all that rare. It was one of more than 100 attacks aimed at the country's electrical grid last year, according to data from the Department of Energy. The motive for these attacks is unclear.
We are aware of other incidents that occurred in Oregon and southern Washington, as well as the incidents from North Carolina earlier in this wintertime.
A similar attack in Washington state left 17,000 people without power on Christmas Day last year.
No particular agency has specific authority over security of the grid.
John Wellinghoff is the former chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC. The agency regulates the interstate transmission of electricity.
The FBI, Homeland Security, DOE, FERC, none of those agencies has specific congressional authority to say you are responsible for securing the grid.
Wellinghoff says during his time as chairman in President Obama's first term, security barely came up.
It was an extremely small part of the job, and security was, and I think still is, a very small part of FERC's overall mission and responsibility.
But police warn substations are easy targets. They're often in remote areas with no surveillance and can be susceptible to simple gunfire. Proposed solutions like more physical barriers, cameras, and even armed guards are often deemed impractical or too expensive. Instead, many in the industry have called for more, quote, redundancy in the system.
Adding redundancy to the system is another way of ensuring continued service, even if you do lose, one leg. Now that can be expensive, but, so is losing power for multiple days.
Joshua Rhodes is an energy researcher and scientist at the University of Texas.
If we have circuits that are critical, say they have, a hospital or EMS facilities on them, or 911 call centers, they generally have multiple points of entry.
Officials have acknowledged this growing threat in recent weeks. The outgoing FERC chairman ordered a review of physical security standards across the country. And the Department of Homeland Security warned of a heightened threat environment for critical infrastructure. There have already been reported attacks in just the first few weeks of the new year. A North Carolina utility company announced Tuesday a substation outside of Charlotte was damaged by an apparent gunshot. Fortunately, that attack did not result in an outage. Jamal Andrus, Scripps News.
All right, many thanks, Jamal. This is definitely a story we'll continue following, especially since these attacks keep happening. On Tuesday night this week, another substation was attacked in North Carolina, though no power outages were reported. We've got to take a quick break, folks, but don't go far. Up next, we've got some wild science stories for you, from atmospheric dust to some very, very loud dolphins. It's really not their fault. We'll see you in just a few.